Let's pray before we get started. Lord Jesus, I thank you for the opportunity that we have to speak as brothers and sisters in the Lord. Your church, God, wants to represent your body well, and we fail to far too often. I pray that you would give us grace for one another as ministry members and as churches, as people who are seeking to do our best for you. Bless this conversation. May it build up your kingdom and encourage your saints, your people. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Sam and Pauline, you've been part of the conference for quite a while, I imagine, long before I joined. Just start with some introductions about who you are and how you came to the CMC. I know Sam's always been a part of the CMC, but I'm not sure about Pauline.
Yes, we are Sam and Pauline Dirksen. I am a lifer. I grew up in the CMC church, first of all in Zilberfeld, and then we moved the church to New Bothwell. So that's always been home. And we still attend the church here in New Bothwell. And so as we continue to attend there, and our family as well, that is home for us. Pauline?
Yeah, my beginnings were different. I grew up in Toronto and ended up moving north of the city into the Muskoka area, and eventually ended up in Nipawin, Saskatchewan, where Sam and I met and dated and married. And hence, since then, I have been a CMCer. Which Sam says I went from being born a Catholic, converted in as a Baptist, and now I'm a Mennonite, which is what I always wanted to be.
That's what I would say. Yeah.
I'll just concede.
Yeah.
That is what Mennonites are good at, just living at peace. So is the Toronto background how you roped Sam into cheering for the Leafs? I'm always wondering how that came about.
No, he was faithful long before I came along.
Yeah.
It's
One of those things. They won the cup when I was 2, and I just can't get past it. I need to see win one more.
Yeah.
Okay. So now you guys are working at Carith Pines. Sam, you've been obviously in the conference, you're an assistant bishop, so you're still involved in the CMC. And I imagine both of you together do a lot of voluntary and extra work for the CMC. But you're working full-time, I believe, for Carith Pines.
Yes. Yeah, we're for Carith Retreats, and Carith Pines is our place in East Braintree. And so Pauline and I are both full-time in ministry there, and the Carith Pines is all underneath the banner of Focus on the Family.
So how did you get introduced into a role like that?
Well, it began a number of years ago, I guess in 2011. Pauline and I, as we were pastoring in Zilberfeld in the church there, our home church, we ended up getting a sabbatical from our church, and we went to this place called Carith Creek, which is a Carith retreat, but in Calgary location. And so we ended up going there, and we spent a week, and we felt that that was life-giving, and that we found some new tools for our toolbox that we could take as we got back into the church and back home. And we found it to be very meaningful. And so a while after that, there was this paper that used to be distributed. It was called the Christian Week. And we had a paper copy of it. They delivered it to our church regularly. And so I was sitting in our bedroom, just sitting on the bed, and Pauline came in, and she showed me this paper and an article that was written about a new retreat center coming to East Braintree, Manitoba. Having grown up in Manitoba, I thought, well, what is in East Braintree that they're going to be creating there? And so I had actually picked up the paper before that and read through it, but it hadn't caught my attention. And so as I read through it, I began to formulate some ideas, and I mentioned to Pauline, well, yeah, it's a good article and all of that, but it wasn't the highlight. And yet the next day I phoned the number there in regards to that retreat center. And so I was informed as to what the retreat center was going to be doing and when they were going to be ready and all of that. And we wondered if we could help as volunteers, as a host couple for the retreat center, because you have to have a host couple for every retreat. And in the meantime, the fellow I phoned in at Focus in BC, we met for supper and we had a conversation. And so from that conversation, we went to a time when he said, "Hey, we've got the job description posted, but you haven't put your resume in yet. Would you, suggesting that we need to apply for this position as directors at Carith Pines." And so ultimately, the short story is that we did send in our resume, and so that was the beginnings of our job now.
We found that the week that we had been there, it was really helpful because we were in a difficult spot. We were pretty tired, and we learned a lot of permissions were given to start to approach ministry from a healthier perspective, and so that we could finish with longevity and not just get washed up and worn out. And so when I read it in the Christian Week, I was quite excited actually that they were bringing those retreats to Manitoba. Yeah. We felt very much, as we were continuing in the pastoral role for Sam being full-time at BCF, it was becoming more and more heavy on our hearts that people were getting tired in ministry and leaving because they just didn't have anything else to give, and they were in really difficult spots. And so when I saw that it was coming, I was very excited. So I think, man, it could help a lot of people. Mm. And so it wasn't difficult for us to jump on board and encourage others to go, because we benefited from it significantly. And so, it was kind of a natural transition into that role.
Wow. So you easily feel passionate about it because it was something that gave you guys new life, or a rejuvenation of your energy for ministry. I guess that leads into that next question I have about what about your position keeps you excited, or that you find life-giving?
I mean, there's a few things I would have to say. The biggest one is we get front row seats to seeing lives changed in a short period of time. It's a part of about the retreat that is really difficult to explain. It's a 7-day retreat, so guests arrive on a Tuesday evening, and then they leave the following Tuesday morning. And having that stretch of time there where the schedule is not overpacked, there's a lot of time to process. We talk about it's a great place of rest, but we're not just talking about physical rest, we're talking about internal rest as well. So people have time to wrestle through things that maybe they haven't had the space or the energy or the desire to actually work through some of their own stuff, some of their hurts, some of the things that they've gone through. And so when you have 7 days to actually do that, it's uninterrupted essentially. You're out of your normal routines that you're doing, your normal commitments and responsibilities. You can actually make some significant headway in allowing the Lord to begin to heal and reveal to you areas that He's wanting to heal, I guess, and to bring rest. Why do we do some of the things that we do? What's driving us so hard? And how are we managing some of those stresses that we're facing and stuff like that? And so we often will see guests arrive very tired. Some of them are angry, some of them are disheartened. And as the week progresses, you can see a change in them. They're leaving more hopeful, and they have some more resources to be able to continue on differently, but still faithfully. And so that's very exciting. I think the other thing for me would be, we get to meet so many incredible ministry leaders from across Canada, from in the States, different denominations, all following the Lord wholeheartedly. They're very genuine in their faith. And you just see so many really interesting ways that the Lord uses different people. And that's kind of neat, just to sit around the table and hear, the Lord place this upon this person's heart, and they're involved in this kind of work. And then you see some different giftings over here, and they're doing this kind of work. And it's just really neat, because when you're in your own local church, even though you have a network within the CMC, we can get together with other ministers, and we can attend conferences and whatever. Those are great, but you can start to think that maybe, is there nobody else doing this? And you don't see that global picture as well as we have opportunity to see that. And yeah, it's really, that's encouraging. It really is.
I think for myself, meeting the people that are in different ministries, whether it's parachurch or pastors or elders or missionaries, it's been really good to see. As Pauline mentioned, we get to have these conversations, and so we're very privileged that way, and to be able to wrestle through things with them. For some, they're tired or exhausted. Maybe there's compassion fatigue that's set in. And some are just looking for a place to be able to settle in and to dream about the future, or what does it look like when we retire 5 or 10 years from now, or those kind of things. And so I just think of it as a time of an oil change kind of a thing, maintaining, taking care of ourselves. And so to see people do that and recognize, hey, it's okay to take a rest or a break. Still with purpose, right? So that we can continue on ministering from a healthy spot. I think that's good. A farmer in our church years ago, he just told me about the versatile tractor that he drove, and he drove for many years, but he took care of it and changed the oil regularly and all of that. And he said when they opened up the engine at one point, or a part of the engine, he said it looked like new. And I recognize that you can take care of an engine and it can still blow on you. But the illustration really stuck with me, that it's something that we need to do. We need to rest in the Lord. We need to take time to do that kind of thing. We need to sleep. We need to eat well and exercise and all of those things as well, to take care of ourselves so that we can minister to others. And so when we get there for that week, when we tell them, we know that you're ministering and that you're out there doing all of these things, this week, we are going to minister to you, the host couple and us and our maintenance couple. We're going to take care of you this week. So the roles change a little bit. So, but it just does really bring a smile to our faces when we get to meet folks like that and get to do our part of taking care of them and helping them.
Yeah, I'm really encouraged by that, because you're getting life out of giving people sort of a renewed sense of their life purpose. And then you're also interacting with so many different people from a lot of different denominations. And so you can pick up on different practices that might not be so familiar, but could be beneficial to add to our Mennonite ways, or our more conservative Mennonite tendencies. Even in Prov, I've noticed in the seminary, lots of different denominations, and that's been encouraging for me to see, oh, you praise Jesus differently and you worship differently, but you're still worshiping the same Lord.
Very true.
Sam mentioned, people come in and they're stepping outside their routine. And so they get to approach the week with intention. And we had this one younger couple attend, and they were both, they had their own profession. She was going to be graduating. She was just finishing her final practicum as a pediatrician, and he was a fully licensed engineer. But they were youth leaders in their church. And so that's how they ended up at Carrots Retreat. So they're very, very energetic. I think they weren't even 30 yet. And so they arrived, and our guests arrive, our hosts welcome our guests in mid-afternoon, and we arrive in time for supper. So by the time we got there, which would have been like 5:30, 6 o'clock, they came up to us and they're like, we've done everything there is to do around here already. Like, we're finished. We walked the trails. We've been in the hot tub. We've ridden the bikes. They've done everything that there is to do. What on earth are we going to do for 7 days? Yeah. And so we just said, well, that's going to be a really interesting week for you. And for them, part of the challenge was unwinding, so that they could just kind of practice silence and solitude a bit, right? Like, how can I slow down so I can actually hear what's going on the inside and what the Lord's wanting to do deep down, lasting change. And it was for them. It was really fascinating to watch how it was a struggle those first few days because they were pacing a bit, that anxious
Right.
restlessness, but then they settled in. And it was just really encouraging to see how it was transformative for them.
It's fascinating how restlessness is a defense mechanism against the exhaustion that you're
Yeah.
you're starting to feel, because well, I don't want to expose it. So what can I fill my life with? What can I be busy with? And meanwhile, you need some spiritual or like a soul rest that you're putting off. I want to go back to something that you mentioned when you talked about why you were getting into care retreats, and you mentioned that you all of a sudden had a permission or a bunch of permissions that were all of a sudden made available that you didn't feel like you had. I've been reading the book of Ruth several times now, and Naomi starts the book off being embittered by the Lord, and then she acknowledges that bitterness and how the Lord treated her bitterly. The Bible tends to, in Lamentations, in Ruth, or in the Psalms, the Bible tends to allow people to feel bitter and to have that bitterness. And I want to clarify, that's not bitterness person to person. I think the Bible is very discouraging of that sort of grudges or unforgiving spirit. But the Bible seems to be comfortable acknowledging that people have bitterness. And I think that can be something, it's really tough for the churches, at least that I've grown up in. It's really tough to let people acknowledge this aspect of faith is really hard, and this part of my life has been really hard. Is that an aspect of the permissions that you were talking about?
Yeah, I would say there's certainly, those are certainly some of them. Yeah. When you read Psalm 13, how long, O Lord, did you, are you just not noticing me, or did you deliberately turn your face on me? Those kind of things, they are questions asked. And so for us just to gloss over them and pretend they're not there, or just to say, yeah, but let's quickly skip to verse 6 where it's all good again. I'm not sure. Permission to walk through that, whether it's the valley or whatever it might be, the Lord does have a purpose, and I think we can grow through those things. And if we skip over them, I think we may miss the point of what God is doing. And so when he asks those questions, those are serious questions that he asks of God. And then he begins to pray verses 3 and 4 and see some light. And then verses 5 and 6 where he's rejoicing in the Lord and the salvation of God. But there's no timeline given there. We don't know how long that is. At least I don't know how long that was. And so I think that's one of the permissions, is to be able to say, I don't like this. Psalm 88, darkness is my closest friend. That's how he ends the psalm. So, but I have to say, there's a bit of uncomfortableness there that says, it's all bad, let's go home now. There is a bit of a negative piece to that. But sometimes I think we miss part of the journey when we just go from, this is difficult, to, oh, by the way, it's all going to be good. We don't have any wrestles here. There's nothing to wrestle. And I think that is one of those things. Another one is just the fact that it's okay to rest. Psalm 127:2 actually says that the Lord provides for us as we're sleeping. So Lord's provision isn't just while I'm out there, preaching the sermon or feeding the poor or those kind of things. Someone has, I guess, tongue-in-cheek said, well, finally, when we get to bed, then the Lord can work. And he gives us strength and all of that. But I think there's truth to that. Some of those permissions we need. And maybe we've even always had those permissions, but just haven't realized them. And maybe for some of us, when we hear that we have that permission, we say, okay, so now someone else is believing what I believe, and therefore I can move ahead with those. But yeah, definitely that is... those are some of those things that we need permission for, I think.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I think the permission of being able to minister out of my humanness. I'm not a machine, and God didn't create me to be a machine. He's not asking me to be a machine that runs 24/7. So for me to be able to accept the limitations that I have, that they're not sinful, it's a reality that we're human. And so, but sometimes the expectation that we have on ourselves isn't realistic, and it's not the expectation that God has placed on us, but for whatever reason, it's what we picked up along the way, and it drives us to total exhaustion if we don't deal with the lie behind it. And that was the huge take home for me, is that I actually have permission to be human. I don't have to be the yes person all the time. I don't always have capacity to be the yes person. And that was huge. That was after 7 days. You don't walk away after 7 days and all of a sudden everything is resolved. Mm-hmm. But it was the beginning of learning to do ministry differently. And it took a long time to implement a lot of what we were learning. They were baby steps for sure. But we certainly can say that we do ministry a lot different today than the way that we did it before. And I think that it's helped to make it possible that we're still doing ministry in many ways.
Yeah, I think that the way a lot of people do ministry, the statistics don't lie when they tell you about how many people have burnt out or have been led to unbelief in their faith, unfortunately. Just because they do get so exhausted, and it's like, how can this be what I'm supposed to be doing if it's leading me to this place of depression, or it's leading me to this place of complete exhaustion, mental or more in their own soul, seems like. So I think it's fair to say that you guys have had a fair bit of experience being church volunteers or being church ministers. And so I'm just going to ask, is it fair to say that one of the largest factors for ministry and ministers being tired is that we often struggle to communicate, or is the largest factor that we don't allow ourselves to serve, as you said, as the human that we are?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know that we can say that there's one thing that would contribute to it, that there's only one thing that would be the biggest significant factor. But I think one of them would be really embracing our identity and our value as being children of God, not on what we do and how we perform, not thinking that we have to always impress. We don't have to prove, we don't have to earn our salvation, actually. And we teach that, right? But to actually let that sink in. If we have to always prove, and we're always striving, and we're always overextending ourselves, what drives us so hard to do that? Why do we find it so difficult to say that, I have the capacity to do this, and I feel that the Lord's calling me to do this, but I don't have the capacity to add on other things, even though they're great things and they're wonderful ministry opportunities. I can't do all of it. So when I think that I can do all of it, or that by saying no, that I'm being disobedient, that just gets exhausting. And the more tired you get, the more resentful you become. And then you don't see people as people that you want to serve. Then they become an intrusion, and they're just draining. And so you don't have that compassion anymore. But, so yeah, that value piece is huge.
I think in Mark, I think it's Mark chapter 6 where Jesus actually walks away, right? And he says there's people here, but we're going to the next city, and it's as though Jesus has been called to do that, to do the Lord's will. He has to continue on. And so I think that can be one of the things. Do we have the freedom to go from one place to the next and not have to do everything in one spot? We often hand out a paper that's written by Ed Neufeld from Providence College, and it's called The Theology of Yes and No. And it's just meant to challenge us. If we say yes to one thing, we're saying no to another, and vice versa, and so on. And we need to keep those things in mind, especially as we're raising children or grandchildren, all of that kind of thing. They are a part of our lives, which is a part of ministry in a sense too, right? We have relationships with them. They'll notice if we're not ever with them. And those kind of things are really important. I think something else you mentioned a little bit, the communication, is that something that can be difficult, and it can be. I think that we often assume that we know what someone else is saying, or that we assume that we think alike, and that kind of stuff is really taxing. Because at some point we think, let's just be efficient in our conversation. Yes, no, this, that, and the other thing. But I think actually good communication takes a little longer at the time, but it's more efficient than just assuming that we know what everyone else is saying. Later on, that will cause disruption, right?
I'm going to go on the communication one just a little bit. Do you have an example of a scenario where poor communication deflated maybe your motivation or somebody else's motivation to be involved in ministry?
I think for myself, those unwritten expectations, things that, and I didn't realize it as significantly until I was placed in a position where I joined a committee where everything was clearly laid out. This is what we expect. This is what we don't expect. And this is how long your term is. And then it was kind of, wow, this is actually liberating. I know clearly what they want from me. I know where I don't need to put my energy. I know that I'm not signed up for life. But so those unspoken expectations that you just know, okay, I said yes to something, and I was well received for saying yes for something, but what happened when I felt like it was now that season was passing and I needed to say no to that and move on to something else? It wasn't as received as gracefully, but rather that unspoken, well, really, you're not going to now? Well, then who's going to do it? Or the need is still there. And so then it made me very frustrated and hesitant to say yes the next time. Because I think often we really embrace people when they take something on, and then we almost shun them when they feel that God's directing them to change that. It certainly does deflate your desire to commit to something, or it can anyway.
Well, it can be deflating if, as a team, you felt that you made a decision, and all of a sudden the end result is announced, and you go, "Hey, that's not what we decided. Now what?" And that can ruminate in your mind, right? And then how do you get back to a healthy place of thinking? And then mistrust can kind of climb in there, right? And so then miscommunication can lead to a lot of things. I keep thinking of the story in Genesis where Eve and where Satan says, this is what you're going to have. And Eve doesn't go back to ask God, is that really what you said? She just kind of makes some assumptions there. And so I think that's an example in the scriptures that we can see of, let's make sure that we understand as best we can. And I know we can take that to an extreme on either side. But communication and communicating with each other, working together, and communication, whether it's verbally or through silence or through these non-verbal things that we give, it's all communicating, right? And it can wear on us too.
Like you said a little earlier, it can save a lot of heartache and time, and it seems less efficient to clarify. But in the long run, if you don't have to clear something up, you don't have to deal with a conflict, you don't have to reassess a situation or reevaluate what you're doing, you can make things more efficient and more beneficial for the ministry if you do take a little bit more time in that one meeting or in that conversation. This leads into a practical application of what we're doing as volunteers. It's September. Hopefully it's still September when this comes out. We're starting ministry. We're starting different programs. We're perhaps starting a WANA or youth group, or Sunday school is starting up again. Are there any steps that we can take prior to starting, or as we start into ministry again? Are there any adjustments or steps that we should be taking personally to reset our expectations and better prepare ourselves for ministry?
Well, I think, it's a great question, especially coming into the season and whatever part we have in the church, whether it's leading the singing or teaching Sunday school, or any of those things. And, it's nice to have the year mapped out, but mapped out is different than knowing what, every word you're going to be saying for every class for the next 12 weeks or more. And so I think trying not to be overwhelmed and yet still have a good vision for what you're going to do for the year is good. Taking one step at a time, recognizing that you're only teaching one class at a time is good. And to be prepared for that and to have a purpose. What is the purpose for you teaching? Is your goal that, do you have certain goals that actually is God's job? Or do you have goals that are what you can do? And so included in that is just teaching and being faithful. That's our job, is to be faithful. If we take on too much of the other role, that I have to change all of these people, that's not going to work well. And then we will be disappointed. And so rather, let's be faithful in the things that we teach and do, and trust that the Lord is going to be walking with us, because it's actually not all about us, right? And so if we make it about us at any level in the church, then it can be very tiring and disappointing. And so can we continue on to faithfully teach the things that we teach, and having that purpose to guide us, relying on the strength of the Lord, of course, which means spending time with God, and also making sure that we're well rested for the teaching time. When we went to college, one of our the guy that was teaching the course said, I found it a long time ago, I'm not going to go out on Saturday night if I have to teach Sunday morning. And so that's how he did his ministry there. But there's value to it. We need to be rested and prepared as best we can. We know that there's always times when we've had to rush and do this and get something done quickly, but are we giving it the time that it needs? And so I think those are important aspects. And I know that because I'm usually the guy trying to do it very quickly at the end. So therefore, there's always something for us to learn. And as we go into the season, it's great. We're excited to get in there. And if we can be prepared the best we can. And I think you mentioned this before too. What is our soul like? Are we prepared for the upcoming season? Are we okay? Have we, looked at Proverbs 4:23 and, guarded our hearts so that we're prepared to teach and to teach from that? And also, have we renewed our minds? Are we prepared for this season by recognizing that we want to teach some spiritual truths as we go through the next while?
I think to add to that as well is that it's helpful if we have somebody that we can talk to where they can speak into our life. It's somebody that we trust. It's a safe space so that I can say, I've been asked to do such and such. Do you think it's a good idea? And because sometimes we don't realize that we're already full, but we think, this is a great idea, and maybe it's a great opportunity, and I would love to be a part of this new work, but do we really have the capacity to do it well? Or are we just, there's needs, and so, somebody has to do them. And it seems like a really great thing, so it must be me. Because I've been asked, that must mean that I'm the one that should be doing it. And not to say that we shouldn't be committing to different things in the local church. We're all about that. We have to do this in community. We are all given different spiritual gifts, and they don't belong to us. They're to us, given to us to be used in the community in our church. And so, but am I taking on too many things? And so somebody that can speak into to us. And I remember someone mentioning to us, we often ask, well, why would I say no? Well, maybe flip it. And why would I say yes?
Right.
Is there something, am I meeting my own need by saying yes? I don't know. Sometimes I think it's just really easy to say yes to something. And then you realize once all the programs start, then you realize how much time everything is taking. And you don't manage well.
It could also be that the person might be in the place where they need to be encouraged to take another role, to teach a class or to do something like that. That's also a part of this too, right? Because we're certainly not talking about just being narcissistic here and laying back and not doing anything, being lazy. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about doing this in a healthy way.
Like the tension of that is good, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to avoid the tension,
No,
that
right.
tension between, okay, I need to be involved and I want to be involved, and how much is too much?
Yeah.
And when am I meeting my own need to be needed by doing too much? And when am I not committing enough because I just want my own space or whatever? Right. So that tension is good. If we don't have the tension, that's, I think, where the trouble can come on either side, where we don't do anything and we're just warming a pew Sunday morning, or we're running like chickens with our heads cut off and we're in every kid's program, every Sunday morning activity, and we never have time to exhale, take anything in.
Yeah. And that said, I mean, all of us are different, right? We have different energy levels and all of that kind of stuff too. But at the end of the day, we want to practice soul care.
Absolutely. Pauline, I think what you mentioned is a really key measuring stick is just talking to somebody else. Ask a trusted person. It's easy to feel like the cup is comfortably, is comfortable when it's close to the rim. Like you can walk around with that cup of water and it's fine. And if you're in that state personally, you feel, okay, I'm comfortable, I can take on more. It's easy to feel like, no, there's space, but somebody might look at your life and like, you might feel comfortable now, but that's because you have you have almost up to your limit. You're almost there. Or they can tell you, yeah, I think you should do something. I think you should get involved somewhere because you're spending all your evenings playing video games, or all your kids have left the house maybe, or they're busy every night with community things, and you're just stuck at home anyways. Why wouldn't you spend at least one of those evenings being involved? So maybe people from the outside can see better than we can in a lot of things.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And that's where we trust each other, right?
So when we find ourselves in the middle of ministry, maybe we're talking November this year or January or December, and you're starting to feel like either somebody's pushing your buttons or you're just feeling exhausted. Is there a way to correct the path before it starts to go off the rails? Is there a way to maybe address a ministry partner that you're working with? Is there a way to address that communication?
Well, when you talk about the communication, or if there's things that are going on with the pushing of the buttons, one, again, is just remember the purpose that you're there for. And the other thing is good communication can hopefully settle some of that. It might be time to have a meeting with that person, or if it's between a couple of teachers or whatever it might be, and to visit someone else in that, someone that can be more objective in having that conversation, and recognize that the conversation is for the good. It's not a competition to see who's right and wrong, but to actually work through it in such a way that honors and glorifies God and is good for the team and is good for the church. Keeping that in mind is always very important. Otherwise, we generally just argue for ourselves, right? I'm not getting this, I'm feeling this, therefore I'm going to. And so we do need to keep that in mind. And to have a third person available is ever so important. Maybe that's a Sunday school superintendent or whoever it is, the pastor or just a good friend. But it's good to have that communication with another person to say, hey, where are we in this? Because it can get tiring. And, it might be something that is beyond our control. We might have to step back. It might be something very large, like health of our family or something like that. But it might be something that just needs to be, we just need to take a step back and recognize, hey, this is a hill that I'm not prepared to die on, so to speak, and continue on. Sometimes if we keep on traveling, then we realize that the issue wasn't as big as we thought it was. Just simply by continuing on faithfully. And sometimes it needs to have someone help us out. But to be honest about it, right? To actually have that conversation, not just to sweep it under the carpet, but to actually talk about it. We talk about that quite a bit, right? Don't sweep it under the carpet. But I think it can be difficult to address someone. It can be very difficult to do that.
Well, and it can be also equally difficult to receive in the way that we don't become defensive, thinking that they're against us, but that I can say, okay, they're obviously saying something, and I trust this person that they have my best in mind. So I don't think that there's any easy way of having those kind of conversations. But if we can start out, so we have our ministry teams, we have it can be, our team of Sunday school teachers, we can have our team of worship leaders, we can have a team of child worker programs, and we can put space to have time as a team to not only plan and work together, but to play together, so that you get to know each other, and you can, we hear about their world outside of this 1 hour on Wednesday night, and we know that, okay, actually they've having a bit of a challenge in their family life right now, and so I need to be a bit more gracious to them, or we can celebrate with them when there's things worth celebrating. And so we get to know them more as a rounded person, not just for what they bring to the team, but for who they are as people. And then when we see that there's struggle, we welcome their input a bit more, because they've cared about me when I wasn't struggling. As much as what they're caring about me now when I am. And I think that as leaders, that's a huge piece, that and it's all tied into that. If we are packed so tight that we don't have time to get to know our team outside of that, what they bring to our team, then maybe things are too tight, and too full. Do you know what I mean? Like, if I'm so overstretched that I don't have time to actually sit and listen to you and ask, hey, how was your day? Or, okay, we're here, let's move on. What's on the agenda? I'm all about efficiency. I love efficiency. And Sam is far more relational. And that's that piece that I think is often missing in our meetings, in our teams. Like, let's get to know each other as people, so that we can do this ministry together, and we can come alongside and celebrate, and weep with those who weep, and speak into each other's lives, where we're far more vulnerable.
The church is such a different organism. It's we've got a book that's called Doing Good Better. We've read that as well. Just how do we do these things? It's not just a structure like we have out, being a part of the town council or that kind of thing. It's different. I think we care for each other differently. We should be treating it differently, and you still want to get things done, but we care for one another. I mean, after all, we care for one another so we can care for people in the church. So it's actually very closely related. We want to be able to have a good way of relating to one another, so that the church can see that as well.
I do think that the ministerial tend to have a good balance of meeting together and fellowshipping together. Like, when I first joined the CMC, the ministry or ministerial meetings were more church than going to church, because going to church was what I was doing in ministry. That's where I was ministering. And so then at ministerial meetings, we shared with each other prayer requests. We often had food together or coffee together, and those sorts of things. It's hard to be frustrated with them. It's hard to have miscommunication with them, because we fellowship together, we eat together, and we're willing to serve one another. I think it actually leads us into the last point that I have on my paper here. There's usually ministry leaders and then there's volunteers. Is there any advice that you guys have for ministry leaders as they look towards this new season?
Yeah, I think that's a great that's a good question. I mean, in Colossians chapter 3, he tells us how we ought to act. We often say, well, it's how I respond. No, it's actually, the scripture talks a lot about what am I bringing to this team? How am I doing this? And in Colossians, he really encourages us to do this together, to love the others, to be humble, to be kind, to be compassionate, to be gentle, to be patient, all of these things. That's not for everyone else to act that way. It's for me to act that way. And if I can take that and say, I want to do that rather than expect it from everyone else, that's a great start. A call to his faithfulness. God is faithful. A reminding of what the Bible says for us to do, right? Speak into others' lives. Like we have an opportunity to speak life into other people. That's a purpose. We're not there just to gather as they would in a club. We have a purpose to encourage people in that. Remember our salvation and continue to renew our minds. We don't want people just to change behavior. We want to change their lives. We want them to think differently. And so what can we do? Certainly remember the way that the purpose that we have, and to enjoy one another, get to know each other a little bit better. There are some things that we can do to get to know each other a little better, like those things that we haven't talked about yet, but Myers-Briggs or DISC or some of those things actually help us to understand each other a little bit better. Psalm 139, recognizing that God created us, but looking at some of those other, those evaluations, they can help us to see what that means practically as we work together. So I know a lot of churches have a bit of a night in September where they just encourage each other for the whole year. And I think some of those things could be done on evenings like that, as they get together and remember that they're a team that's working together in the midst of all their own life stuff.
I came across a great quote on social media today. And it said, "Did I offer peace today? Did I bring a smile to someone's face? Did I say words of healing? Did I let go of my anger and resentment? Did I forgive? Did I love?" These are real questions. And it reminded me of that when Sam was reading those verses from Colossians. I think it's reflecting on those. How are my words bringing life and not tearing down? And how are my actions doing the same?
God has called all of us to those things. It's not just he's called me, he called all of us. So how do we do it together?
Especially in a season where differences are volatile on so many arenas. I'm not even going to start that.
Yeah, but this is a very timely conversation.
Right? It's volatile. And so how can I, even in those kind of conversations and within those topics, how can I still breathe life and speak life into them? It's a challenge.
Yeah.
It's really a challenge.
There's an opportunity to be the church, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And we're living in a time where everything is seems like we've made it very black and white. And so two people that are right next to each other in beliefs and practices are fighting with each other because the line happened to go right between where they stand on one issue, even though they'd be so close to agreeing exactly on a lot of things. It just happens that the line was drawn right between them.
Yeah.
And was there anything that we missed or that you'd like to talk about?
I just reaffirm that we're in it together. It's not a competition between us, and let's not make it just about ourselves where we have to be right or this or that. Let's do this well. Let's do it with grace. We need to pepper the grace in it, and it's about Jesus and not so much about us. I think that, for me anyway, as I previewed all of this, that's something that came to the fore for myself. And you know what? If someone is struggling and we're on the same team, can we walk alongside
Yeah.
And can we help rather than just point and note the deficiencies? Yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah, it takes humility. It takes moments of sucking up your pride and deciding I'm going to put the church first, or I'm going to put the children that we're serving in this ministry, or if we're leading singing, whatever it might be, I'm going to put that first. I think that you guys have lots of valuable information there. I think that's really encouraging. Thank you so much for your time. It was good
Yeah,
to
thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah,
have
great.
this conversation.